After years of caring for my grandchildren, my son told me, "Now we want to live just the three of us." For over a decade, I dedicated my life to caring for my grandchildren, always putting others' dreams before my own. I thought I was building something solid, a home, a foundation. But one day my son looked me in the eyes and said words I will never forget. It was as if suddenly all my love and effort no longer mattered. What followed was a painful journey, full of discoveries, new beginnings, and reconnecting with myself. I learned the hard way that it's not just about being needed by someone, but about being whole for yourself. Today, I walk with more lightness, not because the pain is gone, but because I chose what to do with it. I'm very happy to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment what city you are watching me from. I want to see how far this message will reach. I would wake up before the sun rose, warm the children's milk, organize lunchboxes, and prepare breakfast while still trying to shake off the tiredness that clung to my body like a second skin. Brittany liked her toast well toasted. Erin would only eat if she had the right orange juice, and Jack needed help even to put on his shoes. Every gesture was automatic, but filled with a silent love. I did all this without complaining because I believed it was my role, my mission. Over time, I realized that the love that once moved me began to weigh on my shoulders. I no longer had breaks, there was no longer a me outside the routine. When the children left for school, I tidied the house, did laundry, and prepared to welcome them back. My hands were always busy, but my heart began to ask for something more. I felt useful, yes, but also exhausted, as if I was slowly disappearing amidst the constant giving. At night, when silence finally arrived, I would sit on the couch with a cup of tea and aching feet. Patrick and Tiffany would arrive, exchange quick words, and soon go to their room. No one asked how I was, no one noticed that I barely slept anymore. I smiled at the children, played with them, read stories, but inside something was fading. That house full of life began to echo an emptiness within me. It wasn't ingratitude, I knew. It was exhaustion. I still loved them deeply, but I no longer found my reflection in anything there. I was always serving, always present, but invisible. The sweetness of being a grandmother began to mix with the loneliness of being forgotten. And yet I continued. I smiled on the outside, but inside I began to fade. In recent months, I noticed that Patrick avoided family dinners, always claiming meetings or tiredness. Tiffany, in turn, seemed distant, as if my presence bothered her, although she never said anything directly. Conversations became short, dry, formal. Something was changing, and I felt in discomfort in the air that I couldn't name. It was as if I had crossed an invisible line. I began to wonder if I had done something wrong. Had I interfered too much? Had I exaggerated in some gesture, some opinion? The children still sought me out with the same affection, but their parents seemed to have built a wall between us. Tiffany spoke softly on the phone, locked her bedroom door more often. Patrick no longer looked at me like before. That complicity between mother and son seemed to have dissolved over time. I tried to strike up a conversation one night while Tiffany was washing dishes. She responded with an "uh-huh" and left the kitchen. I stood there holding the dish towel as if it could give me some answers. In the living room, Patrick watched television motionless. I sat next to him, but he didn't take his eyes off the screen. And in that uncomfortable silence, I realized they were slowly erasing me from their lives. And I didn't know why. What hurt me most was the absence of explanations. The silent distancing was crueler than any confrontation. I found myself observing the two of them, trying to find a sign of affection, a gesture of care. But it was as if I had become furniture, useful but ignored. My eyes sought theirs, but no one saw me anymore. It was on a random night, as I was collecting clothes from the clothesline in the backyard, that I heard voices in the kitchen. The window was ajar and the light was on. I recognized the tones. Tiffany was talking to Patrick. At first, they were loose words, difficult to understand, but my name came up. I approached silently, my heart pounding, as if I knew that would change everything. "She needs to understand that we no longer live for her," Tiffany said. "It makes no sense to maintain this dependence. It's past time." I felt a chill. Patrick responded with a murmur, but she insisted. "You promised we would resolve this. I've even researched alternatives." He said something like, "Let's talk calmly," but the tone was one of tiredness, not surprise. This wasn't a recent decision. I stood there, still listening. Tiffany continued. "She doesn't understand that we don't need her anymore. The children are grown. We can have our own routine now. My chest tightened. It was like hearing that my presence was a burden. I, who had left everything for them, was now treated as an obstacle to their freedom. That hurt more than any direct word could. I returned to my room in silence, barely able to breathe. Every word I heard repeated in my mind like a cruel echo. Tiffany and Patrick were deciding my fate without including me, as if I were an inconvenient detail. And, even without confrontation, the rejection was already made. She doesn't understand that we don't need her anymore, Tiffany said. My heart knew before the words. I was going to be pushed away. Tiffany called me to talk on a Saturday morning. I was still washing the breakfast dishes, with Jack playing at my feet, when she appeared at the kitchen door with her arms crossed. She said she wanted to have an adult conversation with me, which already chilled me to the bone. We went to the living room, and she sat down with the rigid posture of someone rehearsing a speech. I, on the other side, held the dish towel like a shield. She began by saying that she admired me greatly, that she recognized everything I had done for the family, but that now things were different. She tried to maintain a serene tone, but every word came loaded with calculation. She spoke about the importance of boundaries, marital life, and the children's growth. Everything sounded nice but soulless. I tried to understand where this was going, but I already sensed the end. This wasn't a conversation, it was a warning. We think it's time to reorganize the dynamic of the house, she said. The children are older, the routine has changed, and we believe everyone needs space. My heart raced. I looked around and everything seemed distant, as if I was being removed from my own story. She smiled, but her eyes didn't match the gesture. I was being let go delicately. I tried to argue, but she already had ready answers for everything. She spoke politely, like someone apologizing for an inevitable mistake. There was no emotion in her words, only determination. Don't take it personally, she said with a cold smile. Don't take it personally, she said with a cold smile. The next day, I found an envelope on the kitchen table. Curious, I opened it. Inside, notes with phone numbers, interview times, and agency names. They were caregivers, professional assistants, women who, by all indications, had already been contacted. My stomach churned. None of this was recent. Tiffany had been preparing, planning my replacement calmly and methodically. I was just the last piece to be removed. I rummaged through the envelope and found dates from more than 3 months ago. She had spoken with at least 4 different companies. The feeling of betrayal paralyzed me. While I spent sleepless nights with sick children and organized birthdays with a full heart, she was drawing a future without me. None of this was impulsive. It was execution. And I was not part of the plans. When Patrick arrived, I tried to confront him. I showed him the envelope, waited for a reaction, any sign of surprise. But he merely sighed, looked at the floor and mumbled, "Tiff just wanted to organize everything better, Mom." That was like a stab. He knew. He consented. And worse, he didn't have the courage to tell me. I stood there, still with the envelope in my hands and my heart in pieces. Everything had already been decided. I just didn't know. In the late afternoon, Patrick called me to talk in his room, away from the children. We went in and he seemed nervous, avoiding my gaze. He spoke slowly, using generic terms: new phase, necessary transition, space for everyone. It was like listening to a company announcement. Every phrase was ready, rehearsed, empty of emotion. When I tried to speak, he interrupted me. "You deserve rest, Mom. This is for you too." I looked at him, expecting a sign of regret, a touch of humanity, but I only found tiredness. "We can't grow with you here all the time." That was the only sincere sentence. My chest tightened. The son I raised, for whom I sacrificed so many years, now couldn't even look at me. It was easier to push me away than to deal with his own guilt. He lowered his eyes as if my pain bothered him. The children were in the living room, laughing at a cartoon. I walked past them with a lump in my throat, not daring to explain anything. I went up to the bedroom, opened my old suitcase and started packing my things. My books, my favorite coat, the portrait with my deceased husband, which never left my bedside table. Each object placed in the suitcase was a silent farewell, a forced exit from the scene. I went downstairs with the suitcase in my hands, trying to appear firm. Tiffany watched me from afar. Patrick pretended to look at his phone. Neither of them dared to approach. The children hugged me without understanding, and I held back tears until the door closed behind me. My own son couldn't look me in the eyes. I left home with a suitcase and an open wound in my chest. The key turned in the lock with a dry click. The apartment was small, simply furnished, with the smell of stored wood and an uncomfortable silence. Frank, my longtime neighbor, had offered the space temporarily. "Stay as long as you need," he said, with kindness in his eyes. I thanked him with a fragile smile, trying not to show the storm inside me. I slowly put my things away as if I didn't want time to pass. I folded my clothes carefully, hung a photograph on the wall, and scattered small objects to feel some familiarity. But nothing truly belonged to me there. It was a temporary shelter and my body knew it. I moved cautiously, as if the floor could give way at any moment. At night, the silence enveloped me like a dense fog. There were no children's voices, no laughter, no footsteps running through the hallways. The emptiness seemed to scream within the walls. I sat on the edge of the bed, not knowing where to rest my hands. My identity was confused with that strange place. I was a woman who had lost everything: space, function, name. Neither grandmother nor mother. Just Christina. I lay down unwillingly, pulling the blanket up to my chin. Outside, the city was still alive, indifferent to my pain. Inside the room, only the ticking of the clock filled the time. The loudest sound was my gasping breath in the dark. 2 days later, Patrick called me. His voice was cold, as if embarrassment still pursued him. "We're moving next month," he said, "to a smaller apartment." I remained silent, waiting for an explanation, but he continued too quickly. "Only with 3 bedrooms. There's no more space, Mom." The words came sharply, without a chance to respond. I wanted to ask if he was sure, if he had thought about the children, but I realized he was just informing, not asking. The tone was definitive, as if he was getting rid of a pending burden. My fingers gripped the phone tightly. He was saying in so many words that there was no longer a place for me, neither physically nor emotionally. I was out of their new world. "You need to learn to live for yourself," he added, as if that were a gift, a noble gesture. But he didn't know that I no longer knew who I was alone. 10 years of serving the house's routine had erased it from me. I no longer knew what I liked, what made me happy. My life revolved around others, and now it revolved around nothing. I took a deep breath, trying not to cry on the phone. He said goodbye quickly, and the call dropped like a closing door. I stayed there on the living room sofa, staring at the ceiling as if seeking answers. "You need to learn to live for yourself," he said, as if doing me a favor. That night, the weight of loneliness overcame me. I sat on the kitchen floor, hugged my knees, and let the tears fall without resistance. Each sob was the release of years of silence. I grieved for myself, for the Christina who nullified herself, for the woman who got lost caring for everyone but herself. It wasn't just pain, it was mourning. A mourning for myself. I couldn't stop crying. Memories came, scattered scenes of the small children, family lunches, sleepless nights due to fever or nightmares. I gave everything. Everything. And now all I had left was that cold floor, that white wall, that deafening silence. It was an emptiness that couldn't be explained in words, a hole that no logic could fill. There, alone with no witnesses, I felt an internal collapse, as if my structure had given way. I was a mother, I was a grandmother, I was a foundation, and now I was an echo of what I once was. I squeezed my eyes, trying to remember who I was before all this. But the memory came blurred, as if it had been erased by routine. I lost myself. But in the depths of that abyss, something trembled. A restlessness, perhaps. A seed of something I didn't yet know how to name. A breath of existence beyond the pain. Something that whispered that not everything was dead. In that silent cry, I buried the woman I was. But from there, something began to be born. Rummaging through one of the boxes left in the corner of the apartment, I found something I hadn't seen in decades. It was a light wooden box, lightly dusty, with my initials engraved on the lid. As I opened it, an old smell of dry paint and paper hit me hard. Inside were my brushes, some hardened tubes of paint, and sketches on yellowed sheets. That was a forgotten part of me, buried under years of routine and renunciation. I carefully touched each item, as if handling sacred relics. Each brush had a story, each stroke a moment. I remembered when I used to paint for pleasure, out of a need to express what words couldn't reach. Before marriage, children, the life that swallowed me whole, I dreamed of making a living from art. But life was in a hurry and dreams were put off for too long. I sat on the floor with the box on my lap and cried again. But this time it was different. It wasn't pain, it was reunion. A confused emotion of joy and sadness, of longing and surprise. I still remembered how to hold the brush, how to sketch an outline, how to take a deep breath before coloring. Art hadn't forgotten me. It was just waiting patiently for my return. I picked up the finest brush and closed my eyes for an instant. There in that silence I was once again the young woman full of plans, full of color inside. My fingers trembled as I touched the forgotten brushes. The next day, I pushed the small table near the window and improvised a little studio. I covered the top with cardboard, lined up the dry paints that still worked, and stretched a blank sheet. It was almost like learning to walk again. The first stroke was timid, insecure, but it was there, and it was mine. The second came firmer. And before I knew it, I was immersed in something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hours passed without me noticing. Each movement of the brush awakened a dormant memory, a familiar sensation. Sadness still lived in me, but at that moment it gave way. I started with flowers, then abstract shapes, until my hand drew 3 children running. My grandchildren, my heart, now living only in the colors I spread across the paper. I didn't stop. I wanted to paint everything I couldn't say. Each brushstroke was an answer, each color a confession. The canvas became a confidant, a refuge, a mirror. I felt life circulating in me again, as if my blood ran lighter, warmer. I recognized myself little by little, not as before, but as someone who could still reinvent herself. When it got dark, I looked at the painting and smiled. It was far from perfect, but it was true. A piece of me had finally found a voice. Each color I spread gave a piece of me back. One day, as I was washing my brushes in the sink of the small kitchen, Frank knocked on the door with a jar of jam in his hands. He noticed the canvases leaning against the wall and asked to see them. At first I hesitated, embarrassed, but I let him. He walked slowly, looking in silence, his eyes welling up. "Did you paint all this?" he asked. I nodded, my hands still stained with paint. "It's incredible, Christina," he said. He approached one of the paintings and touched the edge as if holding something precious. "There's emotion here. Truth. Pain too. But a beautiful pain that we understand without needing to explain." Those words pierced me. Frank was a reserved man. He didn't exaggerate. And now he was saying that my colors spoke for me more than I ever could. We talked for a few minutes. He told me he had lost his wife 5 years ago and that, since then, few things had moved him. "But this here, this touches you," he said, pointing to an unfinished portrait of Brittany smiling. My heart tightened. I didn't know whether to cry out of gratitude or longing. I only knew that something was changing within me. Frank said goodbye gently, but before leaving, he looked at me with rare sincerity. "You have no idea what these paintings make you feel," he said. For the first time I slept in peace. I prepared a simple basket with apple muffins, the children's favorites, and walked to Patrick's new address. I knew I wasn't expected, but my longing spoke louder than the fear of rejection. I rang the doorbell with trembling hands. Erin appeared through the crack in the window and ran inside, probably to alert her parents. My heart quickened as I heard approaching footsteps. Tiffany opened the door with a forced smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. She said a brief "Hi, Christina," and stood in the doorway without inviting me in. I explained that I just wanted to see the children, that I missed them, that I brought muffins. She nodded, but her expression remained firm, impassive. "Today is not a good time," she said. I insisted gently, asking if I could just leave the sweets, give a quick kiss. Tiffany stepped forward, took the basket from my hands and replied, "I'll explain to them. But they're busy now." Her voice was courteous but cold. Before I could say anything else, she slowly closed the door. I stood there alone with the sound of the lock turning behind it. I went down the porch steps with tears in my eyes. The rejection hurt more because it came from someone I had helped so much. The house seemed even quieter than my apartment. "It's not a good time," she said, closing the door slowly. 3 days later, opening the building's mailbox, I saw a small envelope with my favorite handwriting. I would recognize that crooked V anywhere. It was Brittany. I carefully tore the paper and my hands trembled as I saw the note written in blue pen. Hi, Grandma. I miss you a lot. Mom doesn't like us talking about you, but I always remember. The words were simple but full of emotion. Erin still sleeps with the teddy bear you gave her, and Jack says your name when he sees the playground. I hid this note in my backpack and asked for it to be left at your house. I hope it arrives. I read and reread those phrases as if they were prayers. Each line gave back a piece of my heart that had been torn away. I kept the note like a jewel. It was the first night in weeks that I smiled without guilt. Brittany still had me inside her. I hadn't been erased from their memory, no matter how hard they tried. That letter was living proof that my love still pulsed on the other side of the closed door. And even without being able to touch them, they felt me. I sat on the bed and wrote a reply that I would never know if it would reach her. I miss you every day too, my love. I never stopped loving you. Then I closed my eyes and imagined her voice calling my name, her small hand in mine. I miss you every day, the trembling handwriting said. I picked up a new canvas and stretched it over the table. I needed to let out everything that was bottled up. I started sketching loose shapes, confused lines, but soon the outlines emerged. Patrick, Tiffany, the 3 grandchildren. Painting that scene was like reliving years of moments. The smell of morning coffee, the toys scattered around, the hugs before bedtime. It was a living memory transforming into color. I didn't paint forced smiles. I let sadness shape each face. Patrick had downcast eyes, Tiffany a harsh expression. The children were more relaxed, but their faces were enveloped in a mist. Perhaps it was my longing, perhaps it was the uncertainty of when I would see them again. This wasn't a tribute, it was a confession, a way to say what I could never with words. With each brushstroke I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't stop. It was necessary, as if each stroke helped me empty the pain. I cried in silence but kept painting. That family still existed in me, even if it was broken in the real world. The paint was my refuge and my weapon against oblivion. When I finished, I looked at the painting with a mixture of pride and sadness. It was beautiful but incomplete, painful but true. Each stroke was a tear I couldn't shed. The portrait had no end because the pain had none either. It was a common morning, cloudy and silent like so many others. I was having tea on the porch, thinking about the dreams that kept bringing the children's faces. My paintings dried leaning against the wall, and the smell of paint still filled the air. I tried to accept the imposed distance day after day. But that morning something broke the quiet with an urgent bang. The doorbell rang forcefully 3 times in a row like a cry for help. I ran to the door with a pounding heart. When I opened it, it took me a few seconds to believe. Brittany was there, her hair disheveled, her face frightened, holding her backpack with both hands. Her eyes pleaded for silence and comfort. "Grandma, can I stay here for a bit?" she whispered. I pulled her inside without thinking. My hug enveloped her fragile little body with an instinct I didn't even know I still had. She was trembling, and it wasn't just from cold. It was fear, confusion, loneliness. I closed the door behind her as if protecting her from the world depended on it. Brittany leaned on the sofa and began to cry softly, like someone who finally finds shelter after a long storm. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I knew that moment would bring consequences. But still, I hugged my granddaughter tighter than ever. The doorbell rang with urgency and fear. I sat with her on the living room rug and waited for her to speak in her own time. Brittany seemed exhausted but determined. "I ran away through the bedroom window," she said, looking at the floor. "Mom and Dad were fighting again. And no one talks about you there. It's like you died." Those words tore through me. I held her hand and tried to hold back tears. I offered tea, a blanket, some comfort, anything that would make her feel like it was still a home. She said she missed my smell, my rice with carrots, the bedtime stories. She also said no one listened to her. "I just wanted to see you. No one listens to me there." And at that moment I realized, that child didn't run away just out of longing, but out of emotional survival. I called Frank and asked him not to tell anyone. He understood instantly. Then I turned off my cell phone as a precaution. I wanted more time with Brittany. I wanted to understand her pain. I wanted to protect her. But I knew it wouldn't last long. Sooner or later, they would knock on my door. and the reunion would cease to be tenderness and become conflict. I let Brittany fall asleep in my lap. Her body finally relaxed and I felt that there she was at peace. As if all the world's noise had given a truce for a few hours. I just wanted to see you. No one listens to me there, Brittany said. In the early afternoon, someone began to knock hard on the door. There were hurried footsteps, agitated voices, Patrick and Tiffany. I opened it slowly, with Brittany still sleepy on the sofa. Tiffany immediately accused. How could you hide a child? Patrick tried to moderate his tone, but the tension on his face was visible. She disappeared, Mom. Do you have any idea what that means? I took a deep breath and faced them both. I explained that Brittany appeared alone, unannounced, and that I merely took her in. She needed a safe place. And you should ask yourselves why she came to me. Tiffany ignored me. This is emotional kidnapping. You've crossed every line. Patrick, on the other hand, said nothing. His eyes oscillated between anger and guilt, as if he were caught between two worlds. You crossed the line, he repeated, but with less firmness. I stood my ground. I crossed it? Or was it you who crossed it when you erased a grandmother's presence from your children's lives? The silence that followed said more than any scream. Brittany woke up startled and ran into my arms. The gesture was instinctive, irrefutable. The connection between us spoke for itself. Patrick approached, picked Brittany up, but hesitated before leaving. His eyes met mine for a second. There was something there I hadn't seen in a long time. Something broken but human. You crossed the line, he shouted. But something in Patrick's eyes was different. The phone rang at the end of a gray afternoon. I hesitated before answering, recognizing Patrick's number. My heart raced. I didn't know if I was ready to hear what he had to say. I answered in silence, and on the other end came a long pause, as if he was searching for courage. Mom, I know I should have called sooner. His voice was choked, different, softer than usual. I didn't answer immediately. I waited. He continued, stumbling over his words. Since that day, since Brittany ran away, I can't stop thinking about everything. About how things got to this point. I listened, my heart still on alert. I didn't want to get my hopes up. It had hurt too much to create expectations before. I've been unwell, Mom. Really. The girls too. Brittany hasn't spoken properly to us since then. He took a deep breath on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear his pride breaking. I'm calling because I need to say that I failed. That I wronged you. I closed my eyes for a moment. What I had dreamed of hearing so many times was now a reality. But it didn't sound like relief. It sounded like a scar being touched. He was finally looking back. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the phone between my fingers, still in silence, just listening. I can't stop thinking about everything, he confessed. Patrick continued, his voice now a little firmer. Tiffany had been pressuring me for months. She said the house was overwhelmed, that we needed space. And I accepted, without thinking about you, without listening to you. The words came like confessions of an emotional crime. He wasn't trying to justify himself, just admitting it. And that, in itself, was a breakthrough I never would have imagined from him. You were everything to us, Mom. Everything. And I was weak. I let convenience speak louder. He paused for a moment, swallowing hard. I was a coward. You were always there for us, and I turned my back on you. My chest tightened, as if these words were being spoken to the mother I was 10 years ago, exhausted and invisible. He finally saw, but I didn't know if it was enough. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. He was for the first time laying his feelings on the table, raw, vulnerable like never before. I missed you, Mom. But I only realized it when I saw the pain on Brittany's face. She loves you. All of us, in some way, we still love you. Those broken sentences accumulated inside me like small sparks of something old. But the flame still didn't return. The pain was slower than the regret. And time didn't move at the same pace as the words. I was a coward. You were always there for us, and I turned my back on you. I held the phone firmly and let silence fill the space for a few seconds. He expected a sweet answer, perhaps immediate forgiveness. But I was no longer the woman who silenced her pain to protect others. I heard what you said, Patrick, and I appreciate your sincerity. But I'm still hurting. I felt my voice come out firm but serene. You can't imagine what these days alone have been like. The way I was removed from your lives, as if I had never mattered. I needed to say that out loud, not out of anger but out of justice. I see your guilt, yes. But I still don't know what to do with my pain. It was the naked truth, unadorned. And he needed to hear every word. Patrick was silent. No defense, no additional apology. He understood. It was as if he had finally listened to the woman behind the mother. The woman who also existed, who also bled. Do you want to see me? He asked after long seconds. And I took a deep breath before answering. I do. But not now. We hung up in peace. But not in reconciliation. Now I'm the one who needs time, I replied. This time it was he who had to wait for me. Patrick called me again a week later. His voice was calmer but still cautious. He said he wanted to talk to me in person without pressure, and asked if he could come over on Saturday with the children. I agreed. When they arrived, Brittany ran into my arms with tears in her eyes. Aaron and Jack followed close behind, as if that moment were a pause in a time that should never have passed. We sat in the living room, and Patrick looked around strangely, as if realizing there was a life there he no longer knew. Then in a low voice he said, "The children miss you." I do too. My heart tightened, but I didn't rush to meet that phrase. I needed to hear more. I needed to be sure it wasn't just an attempt to fix what broke out of convenience. He spoke about how empty the house felt, about the children's silent gazes, and how Tiffany also began to fall silent. Maybe we tried to build something new too quickly, without realizing how much you were the foundation. I listened calmly, respectfully, but without rushing to concede. After all, this was the first time I was placed at the center, not on the sidelines. Patrick looked at me sincerely. If you want to come back, the room is there. And the space too. The offer was real. But I knew the answer needed to be even truer. The children miss you. I do too, Patrick said. I took a deep breath, looked at the children and then at him. My heart was torn between the grandmother who wanted to embrace them, and the woman who had just rediscovered herself. Patrick, thank you for calling me. For realizing. But I can't go back. The surprise on his face was silent but evident. I can't go back to just being the grandmother. I need to be Christina again. My words came with their own strength, as if they had been mature for a long time. He tried to argue, but I continued. For years I neglected myself. I did everything for you. And I would do it again if I could go back in time. But now I need to take care of myself. Brittany lowered her head, and I approached her. This doesn't mean I stopped loving you. It means that finally I learned to love myself too. The children hugged me, not understanding everything, but feeling the truth in the gesture. Tiffany didn't come, and in a way that was also a relief. That conversation was between me and my son, and I needed him to see me as a woman, not just as support. Patrick took a deep breath, nodded silently and said, "You're right." We hugged, not like before, but like two adults who were getting to know each other again. I had made my choice. Going back would be comfortable, but I didn't want comfort. I wanted truth. I can't go back to just being the grandmother. I need to be Christina again. Frank entered the room smiling, holding a sheet with exhibition information. Confirmed. Next week, your debut as an artist. He seemed more excited than I was, but my emotion came from within, silent and firm. The canvases were all there, scattered around the house like portraits of parts that came back to life. I painted my pain, my absence, my revolt, and now my liberation. In the following days, we organized everything together. He brought frames, made calls, arranged for a friend who handled lighting. I didn't know anyone believed so much in what I did. But Frank believed. And more than that, he encouraged me to believe too. For the first time, my paintings wouldn't just be outpourings kept in a room. They would be seen, felt, interpreted. Each exhibited painting was a piece of what I lived. Abandonment, emptiness, reunion. I no longer needed to explain anything because it was all there in color, form, and silence. It was as if my hands had said what my voice never could. Frank looked at me with admiration, but without invading my space. He just supported me with the respect of someone who knows the value of reconstruction. On the eve of the exhibition, I sat before the last blank canvas. I felt no fear, I felt freedom. My canvases told my story better than words, and for the first time the story was about me. The gallery was silent when I saw my family enter. Patrick led the way, serious, his eyes roaming the works with a mix of surprise and respect. Tiffany accompanied him, more restrained, as if the environment put her in a different rhythm. The children entered hand in hand, their eyes wide at the colorful canvases. Brittany was the first to smile. They walked slowly, stopping at each painting as if listening to something they could only now hear. My colors spoke of abandonment but also of love, of absence but also of strength. It was my life before them, whole raw, finally exposed. No one said anything but their eyes said it all. Patrick stopped before the painting where I had painted the 3 grandchildren sleeping together on the rug in the old living room. He put his hand to his face. Tiffany remained a step behind, watching, absorbing. Brittany walked up to me and held my hand without needing words. Her eyes sparkled. And then, as if trying to hide it, she discreetly wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. That small tear was all I needed to know. Something in us still existed. Something that no distance, no time could erase. Brittany wiped a hidden tear. Tiffany approached me slowly, her hands clasped in front of her body. She seemed insecure, out of place among the colors that perhaps exposed her more than she imagined. She stopped before a canvas where I had painted the figure of a woman surrounded by voices that didn't listen to her. She stood there for long seconds, breathing deeply before speaking. "You were that woman, weren't you?" I nodded with a slight movement. She continued. "I was harsh, cold. I didn't realize how much your presence supported the house." Her voice was trembling, as if each word had to break through an internal wall. I thought I was protecting my family, but I was destroying its foundation. I just listened. It was the first time Tiffany had stripped away her pride. "I was wrong. You are irreplaceable," she murmured. It was sincere. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just true. And at that moment, I understood that something had changed within her too. It wasn't the end of the pain, but the beginning of a possible understanding. Tiffany looked me in the eyes and waited, not for immediate forgiveness, but for acceptance of the step she was taking. I responded with a calm nod. I knew the value of that phrase spoken by someone who resisted feeling so much. It was little, but it was real. And that was enough for now. "I was wrong. You are irreplaceable," she murmured. At the close of the exhibition, Patrick approached with the children. "We wanted to thank you for sharing this with the world. And with us." I smiled. There was something new in our gazes, a kind of care that hadn't existed before. Tiffany remained close but respectful, as if she understood the space that now needed to be preserved. I called the 3 of them to talk. I said I accepted rebuilding ties but on new foundations. I want to continue to be present in the children's lives, yes, but in a healthy way, without erasing myself to fit in. They nodded. It was a new silent contract, made of mutual respect and necessary boundaries. For the first time my voice had weight there and it was heard. Brittany smiled and hugged me tightly. Jack and Aaron came right behind, and for a moment, I allowed myself to close my eyes and feel that pure affection. But when I opened my eyes, I looked at Patrick and said firmly, "Now my life matters too." He agreed with a look of relief, like someone who understands they've been given a second chance and doesn't intend to waste it. We said goodbye right there, among paintings and memories painted with pain and courage. "Now my life matters too," I declared. We hugged, but not like before, like people who had learned. I wake up every day to the gentle sound of the kettle on the stove, and the sunlight streaming into the living room through the open windows. My home is simple, modest, but it carries everything I've rediscovered about myself. The walls are filled with paintings, some finished, others still in progress, and the smell of paint mixes with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Every corner bears my mark, my story, my rebirth. Today I live alone, but I don't feel lonely. I found a new way to fill myself, between brushstrokes, exhibitions, and small routines of self-care that I never allowed myself before. My schedule has pauses, and in them fit good silences, light thoughts, and sometimes even the sound of nothing, which no longer frightens me. I learned to listen to my own voice, the one I had suppressed for so long for the sake of others. Patrick calls me frequently. Tiffany, little by little, has learned to respect me as I am. And the children, Oh, the children continue to be my greatest inspiration. But now our bond is clean, free, spontaneous. I am no longer the woman who is always available. I am the woman who chooses to be. And in that choice I found freedom. I rebuilt my identity with my own hands. My house was small but full of me. The visits from Brittany, Aaron, and Jack became the most anticipated moments of the week. They arrive with drawings, stories, and hugs that last longer than before. Brittany likes to paint beside me, and sometimes we sit in silence for hours, sharing the same creative quiet. Aaron enjoys exploring paints and inventing characters on the canvases. Jack asks if he can hang his scribbles on the wall, and of course he always can. Nothing is obligatory now. There are no strict schedules, no demands. There is real presence, and that changes everything. Each visit is met with a set table, the smell of baking cake, and the certainty that they are there because they want to be, not because they need to be. They know that this is a home, not out of obligation but out of affection. And that makes every moment more precious. Patrick also comes, sometimes with the children, sometimes alone. He sits on the porch and talks about life with a lighter tone. I realize that fatherhood transformed him, just as pain woke him up. Tiffany is still reserved, but today she looks at me with something new in her eyes. Respect. And that for me is already quite a lot. I don't ask for perfection, only truth. The family exists, yes, but now without invisible sacrifices. Each visit was a choice, not an obligation. I walk alone through a new gallery where one of my works has been included in a collective exhibition. Around me, people stop before the canvas, observe, comment among themselves. They don't immediately know my name. They don't know my story. But their reactions say it all. I see teary eyes, contained smiles, touched expressions. And there I realize my pain has become a bridge. My story has touched other lives. I stay far back, not wanting to interrupt the experience of those contemplating. I observe how each person interprets something different. For some it's a familiar scene. For others it's just color and composition. But for me it's everything. It's the summary of a life that was broken and glued back together with paint, time, and courage. Frank finds me there and squeezes my hand in silence. We know what that means. I never imagined that, after so much silence, I would speak with such strength. And without saying a word. Art gave me back to myself. And more. It introduced me to a Christina I didn't even know. Today I am more than a grandmother, more than a mother. I am a whole woman with a story, with a voice, with color. I no longer expect to be recognized. I recognize myself. And that's why I smile unhurriedly as I walk among the artworks. In their expressions I found myself. Now, I'm curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you experienced anything similar? Support the channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video. I'm leaving another story on the final screen that you will also like, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.